Well, welcome again to Friday afternoon. And I have thought a lot about what I want to do today. And it came to me. I have so many stories to tell about clients, and I spend a lot of time week after week, mainly on conceptual and theoretical issues, with just some bowing my hat to working with clients. And today, at least, I would like to again weave in a more comprehensive story of a client. Uh, I am going to talk about, and let me do screen sharing again and screw it all up. Yes, a chart you see many times now. There we are. There's Erikson's individual life cycle stages. Oh, I think I'll go off to one side here. Okay, we have completed the era of preparation. We've worked our way through the four stages. I began my lecturing about lifespan developmental psychology with the fifth stage, and with the case I used to illustrate that stage, identity versus role confusion. So the first five stages have been touched on by me, not in a straightforward fashion, but with five coming first, and then one, two, three, four. And I've also talked about the family life cycle stages that overlap in time, the stages I've already presented to you. So now we need to go up and ahead. We need to go over to stage one prime, intimacy versus isolation. This is the first stage that comes at us after we have emancipated ourselves, after we finish the beginning stages of preparation for separate life. We go out into the world and we have to make decisions about how we're going to secure the intimacy that all of us need as human beings. I think on other occasions I've said we are pack animals. We live in related to other like beings, and we wilt if we don't get some kind of human interaction and human warmth and acceptance from the people who swirl around us. Hermits don't do very well in our culture. And so each of us has to find his or her preferred way of satisfying the needs for connectedness with people who matter to us. It can be very intense, as it is in life partnerships or marriage. It can be more transitory, as it is in having a lot of acquaintances that one cycles between. It can be a life that moves towards in the direction of hermithood, the isolation pole of this duality. But even people who are mainly isolated need some kind of communion with other human beings. If they have absolutely none, they're going to fall into deep disrepair. And each of us has to work out what is the balance between intimacy and isolation that we can tolerate. Where we stand in that balance has a lot to do with how much hurt and disappointment and even trauma that we've experienced at the hands of other human beings. And we are quite capable of being vicious and savage with each other, and unfeeling and stupid, and clumsy and hurtful to each other. Humans have that capacity. And I think, as I said in an early presentation, let me drop down to the bottom of the page again. The five stages above, intimacy versus isolation, role flexibility versus role rigidity, social engagement versus social detachment, generativity versus stagnation, and ego integrity versus despair, are five identifiable stages that unfold after emancipation and on the path to the ending of our life. Each one is labeled 1 prime, 2 prime, 3 prime, 4 prime, and 5 prime because there is a corresponding foundational stage, stages one, two, three, four, and five, that whose successful transit or Wounding, bad wounding, vastly affects what the outcome of the challenge is up above. So they bear corresponding numbers. They're like a first and second story. And the second story stages we're starting the journey on today sit atop a first stage. So, as those who work with people, by those who are watching this who actually work with clients, when you see somebody who bears the signs of woundedness in one of the upper five stages, you need to be suspicious of two things. And I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Maybe things have gone wrong in the immediate preceding stage, and therefore one is entering the next stage with insufficient resources or with too much caution or too much fear to master the challenges of the second stage, the current stage in which one is embedded. But also, if it's an upper stage, think about what could have happened in childhood during the corresponding numbered stage down below. So we're talking about stage one prime, intimacy versus isolation today. It sits on top of the first primordial stage, trust versus mistrust. And it's become very clear to me that people who have trouble up here with intimacy versus isolation usually have had a poor start to their being welcomed as humans into the world. They have not received good enough parenting for infants. They've not been soothed well enough. They've not received enough uninterrupted attention. They've not been able to escape the physical or emotional pain of one sort or another, or they've been even seriously traumatized. Those experiences very early in life will certainly compromise one's desire to be intimate and one's capacity to carry out intimacy at stage one prime. And I'm going to tell the story of one person who illustrates this. Her trouble was not only at stage five, identity versus role confusion, but I believe, although we didn't talk a lot about this, that she had been badly wounded also at stage one, trust versus mistrust. When I met her, well, I'll read the story. I may have to stop and amplify some things as I read it. We humans are capable of developing and engaging in a wide range of behaviors that are astonishing and seem almost incomprehensible. Why would anyone ever do such a thing, we ask? Why are there masochists in the world? People who seem to need to have pain inflicted on them. And how about this? My wife, my dear wife Hermine, once saw a client, a very high profile, effective, middle aged white man who received his greatest sexual pleasure from having an African American woman straddling him naked, defecating in his face, and then having sex with him. What is that all about? Millions consume chemicals of one sort or another for whatever pleasure these provide, even though the cost is the ruination of health and life. More millions spend hours and hours watching pornography, usually accompanied by masturbation at such a great frequency that sensitive tissues can wind up hurt and inflamed. Why? Some get sexually aroused only by touching or looking at feet or shoes. So confusing. Millions are engaged in disordered eating, the self starvation we call anorexia, or the rhythmical food binging and expelling we label bulimia. Why would anyone do such things? And I am a psychologist after all. I could go on and on generating a long compendium of the strange, the self destructive, and the incomprehensible that humans do. My experiences over a lifetime of attempts to give succor to those who seek my companionship has led me to formulate some visions of the human condition, visions that have been helpful to me in rising to the challenges my clients offer to me. I have read a lot of the literature in my field, so maybe I can shed some light on the mysteries I have touched on above. Let me describe my visions briefly as a background to the story I am about to tell. We humans are also very vulnerable, particularly vulnerable during early development. Let me see. Let me stop screen sharing so I can see myself in the middle of the screen. Stop share. Okay, now I can look at myself. I feel the need to. We humans are also very vulnerable, particularly vulnerable during early development. We begin life right after conception in a state of warm protection in the womb. Then we are born, but our nature at the time of birth is hardly very human yet. We are extremely unformed and helpless, the most helpless for the longest period of time of any other species of living organisms. In order to make the transition from total helpless dependency to the ability to be self sufficient and self maintained, certain conditions are necessary. If those conditions are not present, damage occurs. The earlier that various kinds of damages are experienced, the more extensive and devastating are their effects on the developing young human. Later, we become more resilient and can fight our way through failure of needed supports and through trauma with more resiliency and with fewer ongoing wounds. The premier and significant need of the newborn, a need that extends over several years, is to have available the presence of one or more human bonds that provide acceptance, emotional warmth, and kindness, and quick practical comforting when distress starts. Beginning after birth, distress from any source that isn't reduced and buffered very quickly after its onset can build in emotional scars. Scars that lead to a propensity to panic in the face of discomfort, lead to a formation of deeply held images that life is mainly dangerous, and lead to enduring pessimism about the path forward. It is impossible to spoil infants. They need what we call spoiling. As the infant moves into toddlerhood and beyond, longer periods of distress, frustration of desires, and experiences of aloneness are better tolerated. A transition begins to take place. We humans begin to develop the capacity to soothe ourselves when no other humans are temporarily available to protect and to soothe us. If the responsiveness provided early on by the humans attending to the new life is harsh, extremely neglectful, or even traumatizing and destructive, all becomes difficult and sadly troublesome. When bonds are insecure, hurtful, neglectful, or terrifying, the developing young person begins to turn aside from proffered human connectedness. Instead, tactics for shunning any real interactions with others emerge. Turning inward, beginning to mask communication and to keep secrets, and devoting major energies to the creation of some kind of imagined fortress that will reduce the capacity of others to harm, to violate, to abandon, and or to traumatize. This withdrawal from contact creates a huge problem. The young human pulls away from looking outward for soothing and instead searches for ways to find comfort that are in the control of the young human, him or herself. Vulnerability, the seeking of communion, being attached, and any openness to the receipt of human warmth seems dangerous at best and impossibility of joy and human closeness becomes sacrifice for safety at all cost. Impregnability and the disguise of inauthenticity. Since we are very inventive as a species, those who renounce human comfort as a means for finding succor when troubled do, in fact, hit upon various forms of self soothing. Most of us discover some of the almost universal ones that help quite early in life. Sucking on one's fingers or thumbs, caressing genitals are obvious examples. And I believe that all the other strange rituals, and I've provided only a very partial list at the head of this piece, are variations on the simple theme. I am upset and frightened. I need to soothe myself, and this is how I go about doing it. What is awful is that our culture views a large array of self soothing attempts as immoral, as perversions, as evidence of madness, They are highly stigmatized. The humans who engage in them are viewed with contempt, with fear, with impulses to reject and to flee from them. And those who have recourse to such means for comfort are also members of the culture. They are really damned. They have their own internalized self loathing for their own conduct. They feel themselves to be pariahs. Their dirty secrets must be kept in the darkness at all cost, lest they lose the capacity to share daylight with others, even if the daylight is based on an inauthentic presentation of self. A terrible vicious circle is then put in place. I engage in behavior so despicable that I can no longer be a member of the human race. If I ever thought I might find acceptance, that acceptance has become impossible because what I do. With that kind of despair, there's no solution except that of hunkering down ever deeper into the driven behavior that has been adopted for comfort. I am about to tell a story about a young woman who had constructed rituals of binging and purging to sustain herself. For those so inclined, what is often added to my general formulation to create this specific modality is the likelihood that the person so behaving have been interfered with, stopped too often, yanked around, or in some other ways left feeling that they were not in control of their own bodies. Some, as they moved into toddlerhood, have also had parents who actually battled them about what they ate and how often they ate, turning meal times into power struggles. An astonishing portion of them, somewhere around in excess of 20%, have been sexually molested and or have had incestuous relationships with siblings. In these cases, of course, even more terrible guilt and fear have eventuated, leading the bulimic to an even more insistent demand, something like, I and I alone control what goes into my body, and I alone will decide whether I will keep or reject it. Nobody is ever again going to impinge on me in unbearable ways. I will become self contained and do it to myself. I will never become vulnerable and surrender in helplessness to anyone else. For those who have been the unfortunate recipient of the kinds of life experiences I record here, in their binging and purging, they are practicing a kind of active mastery of what had previously been a passively endured trauma. When lonely or stressed, they soothe themselves by enacting over and over again the drama of taking control of their own bodies, using them partly for pleasure, but also using them to engage in a defiant show that they are masters of that self-same body. They are silently yelling, I will use my gorging as I please. I will use it excessively in an orgy of delicious self soothing, and I will inject what is too much when I decide to do so. I am inviolate, defiant, self indulgent, and omnipotent. I can do all of this without any harm to myself whatsoever. I will not get fat, and no one will ever know what I am doing. My membership in the Society of the Secretly Rebellious will remain secret and sacrosanct. Ultimately, those who engage in bulimia walk the earth swollen with shame. Unfortunately, some of those die very young. Several bulimics have come into my practice at various times in my career. For each who seeks my aid, I have always felt that the biggest challenge for me has been to make a human connection, to create conditions under which the one with whom I was attempting to work was encouraged and would find it possible to begin to become real in my presence, to move out of and beyond shame and into the disclosure and sharing of what is. I have never been a big fan of the quote preferred unquote way we who are asked to help are taught about how to proceed. First, we are enjoined that we must stop the bulimia. If it is not, quote, brought under control, close quote, by visits to a psychologist office, then the bulimic should be referred to an eating disorder inpatient rehab facility. There they will be put under observation and control so that the binging and purging will certainly be stopped. There will be group therapy. Oops, my pages are sticking together. There will be group therapy sessions in which lectures are provided on the destructive consequences of the behavior. Individual counseling sessions are also provided. After a month or so of such care, or when insurance benefits expire, the sufferer re enters the community. Aftercare typically consists of recommended participation in a 12-step program coupled with continual counseling. Unfortunately, at least from my perspective, this whole focus is on the badness of bulimia. While in rehab, control is taken away from the sufferer. I believe both of these messages of those who are supposed to be helpful in reality simply re traumatize those seeking care. They repeat as what has been experienced in early childhood. Quote, you are bad. You are engaged in repeating bad behavior. You are being harmful. What you do is evil. We're going to control what put you in and emit from your body. It is no surprise to me that a year after discharge from a rehab, the relapse rate is 80%. So much for the way we helpers are supposed to help. The modal of treatment fails to appreciate that the sufferers are doing as best they can. Bulimia is not a problem, it is a tragic attempt to solve a problem. Unless some better alternative solution can be understood and put in place, it is a horrible thing to take away what seems to the sufferer to be the only possible way to survive. One day I met Joy. Knowing what I have described, I made a decision to venture into unexplored possibilities. I decided to do something that I had never tried or never read about anybody else trying either, something that would be different for her. I am remembering the fourth session with Joy. She had come to me complaining that she was lonely. She was 32. She had had some superficial relationships with males across the transit of her life, but she had never become much involved with anybody. You see that she was suffering from what I had labeled as an Erikson challenge as intimacy versus isolation. She was clearly, by the time she was 32, way to one side on the isolation part of the continuum. She also told me she was frightened that she would never be married. She could feel her aging and was also disheartened because she felt that she would never have children either. She had bought into the cultural project that one of the purposes of her life as she got older was to marry somebody and to have children, and she was afraid she was going to be a cultural deviant and fail to achieve that purpose. I am remembering the fourth session with Joy. Oh, I said that already. Joy was a reasonably attractive, quite intelligent young woman. In the first few sessions, I surveyed some parts of her life, searching for something I could say to her to explain her to herself, to make sense out of her to me. I too was not at all clear about how and why she had managed to see to it that any more intense relationship with a possible partner had never been permitted to take place up until the present moment. She had never dated anyone for more than several weeks. Was she unlucky, meeting only unavailable boys and men? Did she lack relationship building and caretaking skills? Was she doing something or some things to ensure her detached safety rather than engagement? In this fourth transformative session, Joy found her heroism and announced to me, I'm a bulimic. I never told anyone. I keep it a secret. She began to weep forlornly. I handed her the tissue box that always sits on my coffee table. Hearing this, I began to respond to her in a fashion totally opposite to, quote, what I should have been doing, close quotes. I said to her, if you've never told anyone, then I feel privileged to be trusted with your secret. You must have been lonely for a long time, keeping something so significant to yourself. Joy cried harder. I date someone for a period of time, The stress makes me start to binge and purge more. I can't tell the man I'm seeing about me. I'm afraid no one will have me because what I do. I can't stand myself. Joy, you're telling me this for a purpose. Are you wanting to do something about your binging and purging? Are you asking for my help? Yes, I want to be rid of it, but I've never been able to stop. Joy, I have very romantic beliefs about people. I think each of us in our own ways, no matter how strange, does about the best we can. I believe your episodes of binging and purging are very important to you and that they do significantly good things for you. I'm not sure that I want you to encourage to give it up yet. I want to encourage you to give it up, at least yet, at least till you and I know a lot more about the benefits it provides. And until you discover some other means to provide yourself the same goodness you clearly need, but ways that don't fill you with such shame, make you feel unacceptable, and have to be kept secret. How could that happen? I don't know what you mean. Let me go on. I also believe the change always begins with an acceptance of what is. For you, doing bulimia is what is. I don't want you to fight against your desire to binge and purge, and I'm certainly not going to try to take it away from you. But it's possible that we can learn a lot more from your binging and purging than you've been able to learn so far. How could I do that? From what you've told me, from what I know from reading and from seeing others, you're deeply ashamed of what you do, and you do it in lonely privacy and secrecy. Yes, I live with a roommate. I never do it when she's around, and I always make sure to leave no trace. It requires very careful planning. Thank you again for telling me how anguished you have to be about hiding yourself and being so furtive. I know what you're admitting to me is hard for you to tell me. It takes great courage. Letting me hear about all of this is a fine start. But I have a thought. Could we at least see if it's possible to end your having to be so hidden? Here's what I'm thinking. I'm pretty sure you haven't learned enough yet through your own self observation about what moves you to embrace such troublesome behavior. I do know a few useful things about people and how to see their dilemmas from a different perspective. It's my training. So I believe I might be able to be more objective, perhaps, and see into the riddle of your compulsion better than you can, all by yourself. But I need your help. Maybe if the two of us tried to learn more about you, what you're doing when you do your bulimia, if we did it together and you did it with me, we'd be able to see much more deeply right into the heart of the matter. What I'm asking you to do is whether you'd be willing to let me keep company with you. I mean that literally. I'd like to be present and watch while you binge and purge. If I could be there while you do it, you wouldn't have to be so lonely. And maybe I'll be able to notice something about the meanings and purposes of what you're doing that you haven't noticed. No, I could never even think of letting you see me that way, Joy replied in horror, and to the accompaniment of more forlorn tears. It just couldn't happen. There's no way. I understand it would be an incredible stretch for you. I know, but it's what's possible. I could see you late on a Saturday afternoon. No one's around in this building then. You could bring with you however much and whatever kind of food you'd like to consume. We could just sit here in my office. It's private and quiet here, and I'd just quietly watch you eat. I won't say a word to you. I don't need to say anything. I just want to see. I know it'll be painfully awkward for you, but I promise, again, I won't say a word. I can also promise you I won't be disgusted. I feel very interested. I won't scold you either. I won't think you're ugly. I know full well you will be giving me such a precious gift if you have the courage to be transparent and let me see all that. I can't think of a more precious gift you could give me. You would be letting me see for myself what you go through as you soothe yourself and try to make your life bearable. When you've finished eating and need to throw up, we can go to the women's room across the hall. I'll be with you. The door will lock. I'll make sure no one can possibly come in, and I'll be in the woman's room with you, and I'll keep you company while you purge. That's impossible. Even thinking about such a thing is too frightening. The session ended. My own behavior was frightening me. What was I saying? Where was I going? I had never read any research or theoretical paper on making such a response as an intervention in the treatment of bulimia. Yet it seemed so right to me. But as I recorded above, I had even found a way to explain to myself what I was proposing to do. I was taking the first step towards turning something so shameful and so hidden into a shared human experience. I knew the work I hoped to do with any and all who came for my care depended more than anything upon my being able to make an effective working alliance with my clients. Their potential for experiencing gains emanating from the therapeutic encounter typically grows slowly, even when I am able to find the kind of conversation that will let the person I am seeing feel understood and prized. What I was proposing to do with Joy would be a huge leap. Her sense of trust in the alliance, I thought, would be so much more effectively established by providing not just quiet moments of acceptance created solely by a healing conversation, but by viewing the sharing of a deep emotional experiencing of that acceptance. Not the words to telling me about it, but sitting there while she actually did it in the real midst of her most tormenting behaviors. If she could become willing to do what I was suggesting, she would not be telling me about herself and hoping that I could listen without revulsion. She would be being herself in ways she both needed and hated, and I would be put to a real test of whether I could regard her with care and tenderness as I saw her ugliness being enacted in my very presence. She would know if I would really honor her or were simply trying to fake it. Why was I taking such a risk? Maybe it was because I knew treating bulimia was such a difficult challenge under any circumstances, and that coming at it in a novel way might make a huge difference. Maybe I was just being a brat again, playing around with going across the boundaries of how I was supposed to behave for the defiant pleasure of seeing what would happen if I did cross those boundaries. I have done that too often, occasionally disastrously in my life, and I was risking another human's life in the presence this time. I persevered in the face of my doubts. It took me 4 more sessions exploring whether or not Joy would listen to me and take up my invitation. For Joy, even daydreaming about the possibility, opened the doors to many memories of times she had been treated harshly, times she had felt betrayed, and times she had been scolded and shamed. One of her memories was so consistent with what has been written about the history of large numbers of those who engage in bulimia. Her older brother sneaking into bed at night with her and caressing her genitals. She had replayed the memory for me she replayed the memory for me. After an initial shock at his behavior, she had awakened and began to yell in protest. Her mother came into the bedroom, screamed bloody murder, and excoriated both of them for their sinfulness. The next day, mother told Joy that Joy was going to grow up to be a damn slut. Joy was 9. At last, Joy agreed to join me in the experiment I had suggested. My pleading with her seemed to have won the day. The following Saturday afternoon, she arrived at my office with 2 large market bags. She unpacked a loaf of raisin bread, a half-gallon of Rocky Road ice cream, a bag of Doritos, a bag of Fritos, a box of a dozen donuts, a jar of peanut butter, and a box of animal crackers. I thought the last item was particularly touching, a small connection to a fragment of both real and symbolic sweetness from her youth. She paused after she had unpacked the forbidden cash. I had to encourage her when I saw how she was becoming so locked in hesitancy. Yes, you can be brave and do this. It will be the beginning of something totally different, something new. You'll be starting the process of taming and redirecting what has always felt to you to be an irresistible, hideously ugly impulse in the face of which you were powerless. The fury of your impulse is sustained by your hiding it. The light of my gaze will soften it. Joy proceeded to gorge herself in front of me. Her eating was fast and furious, almost crazed. I could see no pattern to it. She would lick some fingerful of peanut butter, switch to eating a donut, take some spoonsful of ice cream, munch on Fritos, and just cycle randomly. She asked me for some water, and I got her some from the little kitchenette in our offices. I watched quietly, trying to imagine what she was experiencing. I do not remember her saying anything except the making of the request for water. I did notice that she began sweating rather profusely, and that the glances she gave me as I tried to keep her peaceful company seemed to express great apprehension. At last she broke her silence. I can't stand it anymore. Is it time to go to the bathroom? Yes, do you have to go with me? I don't know if I can stand your being there. This has been so special. You've come this far. Please let me go the rest of the way with you. We rose, left my suite, and entered the ladies' room together. Joy opened a stall and knelt in front of the bowl, sticking her fingers down her throat as she knelt. As she took her position without any conscious planning, I knelt beside her in turn and put my arm around her to help support and to reassure her, much as I had with my own little children when they were small and needed to throw up. Joy began vomiting immediately. I thought to myself that she had become very adept at inducing the discharge of what she had eaten, and I became annoyed with myself from buffering myself from the horror in which I was participating by resorting to a kind of black humor I sometimes generate when I am feeling anxious or overwhelmed. As she completed the strange task she had come to do, she began a round of powerful sobbing. Do you need to go back to my office and begin eating some more? I asked. Teach me. I don't know how you do this ordinarily. Joy shook her head no. We walked back to my office together. She packed up the uneaten food, crying softly all the time. She continued to cry in silence for the last 10 minutes of her session with me. I did not pull at her by talking to her, by asking her anything. I just sat there, quietly bearing witness to the moments we were sharing together, once in a while handing her more tissues. Over the next several weeks, I engaged her in doing a review of the cascade of thoughts and feeling stage she had experienced as she was going through the episode with me rather than alone. I learned that in the flow of her imagination as she stuffed herself, she was talking to herself in a kind of sweet, soothing, reassuring baby talk while she ate. In the early stages of devouring, she had felt naughty, rebellious, and defiant. As the quantity of food inside of her increased to the point of real discomfort, however, she felt mainly only defiant. She experienced a kind of driven insistence. She was going to become huge and powerful. She would not give in. She would not burst. When she could not stand the pain of distension anymore, the vomiting was orgiastic for her. It was an explosive relief. It brought sleepiness with it. But in the peaceful aftermath, she experienced a terrible, forlorn loneliness and emptiness, worse than the experienced distress that she felt at the start of her binging episode. And with the release, she felt both hideous guilt and self lacerating shame and self hatred. She was worthless, less than nothing, a piece of putrescence deserving of universal condemnation. Joy told me that what I had briefed her might happen had been accurate. My presence and companionship had softened the awful parts of the experience for her. The after period was more peaceful. My quiet acceptance, my not screaming at her in revulsion or fleeing from her, had reduced the angry, critical voice of her own conscience, telling her that she was unfit for human compassion, even for human companionship. For my part, I said that if she wanted, I now knew that it might not be bad for comforting herself to keep her bulimia. at least for now. But if I would agree that she should keep it, it would help if she kept it in a much more public fashion as she had with me. If you could wait and do it here in my company, that would be wonderful, and I would feel blessed to be there with you in your struggle. But I urge you to consider risking yet another brave step. I hope this week or next, if you have to wait, you might find the courage to tell your roommate that you do bulimia. Tell her that you might need to binge and purge sometimes when she's actually at home with you. Of course, this too would be a huge risk for you to take. Joy considered my words. She appeared thoughtful, haunted, tempted, and confused. In the end, Joy did follow my lead. Talking to her roommate was a wonderful second turning point, and I was able to breathe a sigh of relief. The roommate proved to be a kind and sensitive young woman. She gave Joy plenty of sympathy and told her that when she was feeling her unbearable tension and need for the behavior, if she wanted to try not binging, the roommate would be happy to listen to whatever was the torment. But if she felt she had to do her eating craziness, the roommate would understand. She could just go to the bathroom and the roommate would not interfere. About 2 months after the first time, I kept Joy company in her binging and purging, and she was able to do so without concealing the fact when she was home with her roommate. She met a man who seemed taken with her, and who in turn was quite appealing to her. My next challenge was to get her to tell him about her being a person who practiced bulimia. Of course, more arguments about why she could never do such a thing became a topic of our conversations. And of course, they all boiled down to the same thing. Joy was aware that the admission would mark the end of any interest her newfound companion would have in spending time with her. She would be abandoned, as she well deserved to be. Once more it took time for me to get Joy ready, and once more the result of her courageous admission was quite different than the catastrophic fantasy she had created for herself. Her new love was quite tender with her and very concerned. He asked her if there were anything he could do that would be helpful, and he told her that as an adolescent and young adult, he had spent most of his days lost in a fog of marijuana. He appreciated what it would mean to Joy to go beyond how she was currently living and to contend with life naked without both the comfort and self abnegation that were tied up in her bulimia. Joy described to him how I had responded to her confession to me about her affliction, how I had been willing to be present and to keep her company. Her her new boyfriend liked the story, and he replied that if she wanted him to keep her company while she binged and purged, he would be glad to take up some of the responsibility. I only saw Joy for a few more months. I want to underscore that while I never told Joy directly she ought to stop engaging in binging and purging, by having created a path to a different life for her, a path of finding communion first with me, then with her roommate, and finally with a potential life partner, had resulted in a continuous diminution of her desire to binge and purge. Three of us were now able to give her some soothing, healing kindness, our human being with her, and acceptance to soothe her when she was upset, to bring some optimism that life was possible, to counteract her self identification as a hideously deformed person. In this fashion, she and I together had created a means forward for her to secure increasing sustenance for her true need, the need for a sustaining, loving, intimate relatedness. Now the presence of human caring could become, as it should have many years ago, the way she could find succor when life troubled her, without her having to behave in some strange form of autoerotic activity. It could now become possible to engage in the surrender of her disordered desire to achieve an insane kind of self contained mastery of the impossible. By the time she and I had parted, she had only binged and purged once in the prior 2 months, and had done so attended with the tenderness of her male companion. They were talking about the possibility of living together. I always love telling that story. It's one of my best stories. And uh, I've never repeated the challenge. I haven't had, since I work with her, I haven't had another bulimic ever come into my office. And I don't know at my age and my growing cautiousness as I get older, if I would have the courage to do a set of interactions with a client that would get my license yanked immediately by the board of psychology. Maybe I'd still have the courage. I'm sure I'm going to be put to the test in some way, but at the moment, I'm not sure. So let me go back to screen sharing. What do I want? Let's see if this comes up. Yeah, well, I think, yes, I need to start closing other things. And I think it'll be here. Yes, I don't need this now. I don't need this. Oops. Yeah, 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 yeah. Stop share. Let me start share again. Okay. Uh, yes, I have it. It's here. Okay. Uh, Aaron, could you unmute for a second and tell me how to get rid of the little pictures of the three of us?
Just push the negative sign at the top right. You see there's a little negative on the pictures of us. They're on the upper right corner for me.
Wait, let me move that. Oh, here it is. Okay. I assume the full screen now is occupied by the document I have here.
Yes.
Epigenetic theory and some possible intervention paradigms.
Yep.
Hey! Well, let us go to stage 1 prime. In the consulting room, here are the signs that you have a client who's struggling in this era. Opacity, unwillingness to be known, separation of erotic and companion needs, making that split that's so common in our culture as a way of avoiding being fully attached to another human being, doing sport fucking and social interactions with different people. I'm really writing about here. Uh, the separation of erotic and companion needs. Reclusiveness, that's even farther down that continuum. Not even spending much time with anybody. Absence of a peer group. People who are really wounded don't even form peer groups that are reliably pulling at them, and they make use of much. They will suffer mild continuing dysphoria. They will come in and report fatigue a lot and low grade depression. They are like wilted plants, not getting the kind of human kindness, acceptance, and warmth that's available out there. So, like a wilted plant, they wilt. There's reliance on cyber relationships. Yeah, the people who engage in pornography addiction, or cyber relationships, fuller relationships, having conversations, sharing troubles with somebody who lives in Iceland. That all that's quite safe, and you can stop friending that person or get rid of them if anything goes south. So you have great control over a real relationship. But there's nothing greater than hugging or skin contact or sitting present in a room and seeing the person in all their fullness and seeing the full range of their gestural communication. That is very necessary for real relations. Here we go with pornography addiction, serial flitting, starting a relationship with somebody, finding what's wrong with them, and then moving on to the next relationship. Like being a hummingbird, pulling a little bit of sap from a plant and quickly darting away again. Oh, I love this one. Imagery involving engulfment. Uh, They're actually, and I use the Bible when I have clients dealing with that. They feel if they bond fully with another person, they're going to be captured. They're going to lose their self. Their self will melt and merge with the other person, and the other person will be fully in control of them. And they withhold, they have orgasmic problems, they keep secrets, they find some way to keep parts of themselves aloof because to surrender the totality of oneself is just too dangerous and the other person will now consume them. I talk about the myth of Jonah of the whale, and they should remember that. Jonah was foreordained that he would be swallowed by the whale. But did the whale digest him and make the whale part of him? No, at the appropriate moment, the whale defecated Jonah back out near the beach so he could come up on the sand and fulfill his destiny. Maybe to be inside the whale was really very delightful, and Jonah felt cared for and protected while he was on his way to the next destiny. It is not dangerous to experiment with allowing yourself to be devoured by another human being. That's another exercise I give couples sometimes too, to do the psychoanalysis game. One person lies down on the couch and for 50 minutes says everything, withholds no thoughts, keeps no secrets, talks about everything that arises in consciousness. And there's a related game, the related game of being devoured, allowing the partner to take over. When person A gets up in the morning, person A does nothing, just stays in bed lying there until person B notices the person A is awake. And then person A recommends what the person A get out of bed now, go take your shower, stay in your pajamas, and come downstairs. We're going to eat, and I'm going to feed you, and so on and so forth. So we'll be talking at some of those things. Uh, okay, I'll get there. All right. Where the hell? Why wasn't it stay? Okay. Serial flitting. That's where it was. Imagery involving engulfment. I'm back. Devouring, entrapment, and/or the dissolving of the boundaries of the self. Another thing you'll see, and I have a couple who is in their 70s who's working with this now. Person A thinks that he's marrying person B, but person B has never done the necessary developmental work and gotten through the preceding developmental stages successfully enough to be ready for an intimate peer to peer relationship. Person B needs to be adopted. They were not parented properly. Pieces of them haven't developed yet. They need to be reparented by the partner, and the marriage is always out of kilter. The partner seems needy, demanding, or aloof, and the person who's married is usually frustrated and disappointed and can't figure out what's wrong. But if the person who's done the adoption hangs in and ministers over several years to the needs of the adoptee, the person who's been adopted does break free, come forward, and eventually gets ready to leave home. And the thanks and goodness that the person who's been the surrogate parent gets is that the adoptee leaves home and divorces the adoptive parent. It's really, it's really quite a Greek tragedy, the whole thing. Uh, let me make a note. I think I want to talk about a case. I don't have one written up at this moment, but I think I want to. Oh yes, I may have it written up. I'll make a note here to talk about adoptions posing as marriages. All right. So there, those are some of the things that allows the caregiver, the therapist, to see wounds, and those wounds signal something. What is the therapist's task in working with the client? To help the client to find the courage to connect all parts of the self to another or others, to help them to reach the point where they will dare to take up the risk of transparency and suffer the consequences and manage the consequences of the transparency that they've shared with another or others. How do you do this? You demythologize relationships. That's one of the things you often have to do. We grow up in a culture that tells us what good relationships are supposed to be like. It tells us that if you have a good partner, things are reasonably idyllic. You sail through life with reasonable comfort. You're happy ever after. Maybe in a while you'll have a mild disagreement, but you never hate the other person. You never feel like leaving. You never question why you got married. You never feel devastated by them. They never hurt you. They never do things that feel like betrayals. And that's all a myth. If you're in even a good relationship, there's turmoil and trouble and hurt and processing of differences and conflict resolution that's necessary a good deal of the time. So anybody wanting to try and come out of their own seclusion and dart forth into what's real has to be prepared to cope with and deal what's real and not flee at the first sight that there's a problem that needs to be addressed between the two parties. What is used to flee is often noticing what the wounds and unpleasantness is that the partner brings, and that has to be addressed too. The person who's struggling to become has to be challenged. Yes, your partner is having trouble with this, and your partner can get very cranky about that, or your partner is still much too attached to his or her mother. And I can understand why you're jealous and why you want to throw them away. If you throw away anybody who's going to bring you problems, you will throw away everybody. Anybody who comes to be with you is going to bring you wounds. You have to have a taste for those wounds. You have to have a willingness to endure them, and you have to be a person who helps in participating, helping your potential partner to overcome the wound. The wound is not a reason to get rid of somebody. The wound, just like I've tried to do with you, is a reason to move forward into more closeness with that person and to learn about the wound and see if you can help the other manage that wound. I'm already doing the next thing. I shatter courtship rituals. We are taught that we should be on our best behavior, show how wonderful we are, how nice we can be a partner to somebody else. We're taught to hide what's real. You have to get people very successfully attached to you, and then maybe a little of time over some weeks, months, or years start showing thing might be real. That's a bad way to start. Better to start with something that's important, that's real, and see if the potential partner has a taste for dealing with important, real things that are challenging. Get rid of people for reasonable reason and do it early. You have to teach relationship caretaking. How do you deal with somebody else's wounds? How do you manage conflicts? How do you negotiate differences? How do you work out rituals that sustain people? There's a lot of relationship teaching. And when I was talking about the family life cycle, I spent a lot of time on what it takes to build a sustaining relationship with a single other human. All those skills need to be taught to people who are wounded in this era. You may need to foster differentiation family of origin. The reason that the relationship may be failing is that the person never has the energy or wisdom to deal successfully with the challenges of this era, because too much of them is still enmeshed with their family, and you have to help them to separate. That's problems in the family life cycle related to this stage. Or you may be needing to do an identity review. It may be that stage 5, the last stage before leaving home, has not been resolved well. And there's one of those strands of identity that I lectured about has not been put in place, and some repair work has to go on there before the repair work of this stage can take place. Okay, I think I am done now. I'm at a reasonable hour. I covered a good deal of territory. I was talking a mile a minute again, and I will stop the sharing so I can see better. And I will encourage my partners to open their mics.
Arthur, I was very I don't know, impressed and inspired by your intervention with your client, where you observed and you participated in her binging.
Hmm.
What, where did that thought or that idea come from for you?
My seeing people who were bent and tortured in some ways, and all of them had a great sense of being pariahs, of being outsiders in the culture, and the need to maintain secrecy because what they were doing was so disgusting and so loathsome, even loathsome to them, they couldn't share it with anybody. Maybe, eventually, maybe they might confess it to the therapist, but it was always confessed with a sense of shame. And I figured the first part of the barrier to be overcome was to overcome the shame. So that occurred to me as a way of overcoming the shame, to be real in my presence, not just find some mincing words maybe to talk about it in the 50th session, but to just be there in all her realness and let me be an observer of what was real.
And what do you feel that that actually did for her in the process?
My being kind, accepting, not interfering with her, my even saying to her, I have no desire to take this away from you, I think encouraged her to trust me more. And if I could do that, maybe it wasn't only therapists that could do that. Maybe she wasn't such a pariah. Maybe there were other people in the culture who could actually accept her companionship.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, I think it comes from maybe it's an iteration of this idea of. I know Arthur in the past you said a lot of times that it's our job to kind of speak the unspoken.
Yeah,
It's in a way,
unspeakable.
yeah, the unspeakable, and so speaking it, witnessing it, being present with the things that people are hiding, basically shining sunshine on things tends
Yes.
to diffuse them. Yeah, that was kind of what I was feeling.
Yeah, me too. I do a similar thing. It occurs to me I've had some couples where the problem is the secrecy of a pornography addiction, and I encourage the person to make that public to the spouse, to acknowledge to them that they have recourse to pornography frequently, and if the spouse is curious about the pornography, and if I'm working with couples, I say to it's usually the man who's the pornography addict. I usually say, go sit by his side, be with him while he looks at, see the images he's seeing. Maybe you can discuss them when he's finished looking and doing whatever he's looking. If he wants to masturbate, put your arm around him, let him masturbate while he's looking. The very thing that I did with the bulimic, I encourage the spouse of the pornography addict to do, to make it a social event, his whatever he's doing, not something he shamefully does in secrecy and hides from everybody. And then I try and get him to comment aloud, to say aloud what he's daydreaming about, what he's thinking about while he's watching, to make his inner life as he absorbs this transparent to his partner too. And that's another step of building the bond between the two of them. And then I ask him if he would like to have her ask him if he would like to role play what he sees the people in the pornography film to do. And would he be too shy, or did she have would she have the courage to do it? They can see if they can make this a real act between the two of them. So he doesn't have to go looking at pornography and his loneliness on the television screen and hate himself. It's a series of steps to make it part of the intimacy between the couple rather than a pariah, a disgusting thing that a pariah outcast does.
Mhm.
There are very few partners who are willing to do that. But it is powerful and it does work. I do have evidence about that.
Yeah.
And the very act of the finding acceptance, again, as I said, it starts increasing the understanding that another human being is a source of comfort when I'm in distress. This is a stupid source of comfort. I wind up hating myself and I make my penis raw with whacking at it over and over again. If I can go talk to my partner, maybe she'll hold me or rock me or do something else. Maybe I don't need to do this anymore. And that is the path of good human development. We stop engaging in autoerotic activities to soothe ourselves. We make it a social thing. We make kindness from others the thing we find to help us through hard times.
Well, also the act of binging, the soothing is transferred on to the therapist.
Yes,
You're providing the soothing.
yes.
Yes.
I'm the first human being that can be trusted to provide soothing.
Mm-hmm.
Only food or alcohol, the bottle does. I can take the bottle down and pour it down. Then I have warmth inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beauty of 12-step programs. I think it's the love and caring in the 12-step group, not the belief system that they're pursuing. It's showing up and mattering to other people and getting kindness. And just call me in the middle of the night if you have trouble. I'll talk to you. You don't have to drink. That is the curative element, I'm convinced, of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
The alcohol can be given up. Oh, for those who are listening to me and you two guys, I don't know if you've seen the HBO documentary that's in its roster of documentaries for streaming. It's called Thin. And it's laid at probably one of the eating disorder clinics in the country that has one of the best reputations. It's supposed to be a mecca for troubled people with eating disorders. And it simply follows, I forgot whether it's 3 or 4 new admittances that are coming in on the same day. It follows, they got permission to film on board. I guess the place thought this would be a good public relations gesture for the place. But I was horrified watching. I was horrified what treatment consists of. I was horrified that 2/3 of the staff who's working with these people are grossly obese. That's, that's who's on the staff. That just seemed bizarre to me. That seemed wacky to me. And everything is focused on stopping the bad behavior. That's what the whole purpose of being there was. There was very little of anything that felt like kindness, compassion, or anything. Is that you got to stop this ugly thing you're doing, or you're going to die, and nobody will want to be with you. By the way, I saw that before I experimented with my client. I saw what was the esteemed model for how you treat people with an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and by the way, they did follow up on them. One of them was dead within 2 months of leaving, and I think the other 3 had relapsed.
Wow.
All right, it's time for me to go now. To be continued next Thursday.
All right.
Okay. All right. Be well.
Bye.
See you
Bye now.
guys.